Morning, folks. Let's finish up the story of Old Man Bender here. This is part 3, so if you haven't seen the first two, this won't make a whole bunch of sense to you. So basically, I'll go over quick. What it is back in 1871 to 1873, there was a family in Kansas that were a bunch of killers. And they had a little, kind of like a stagecoach stop. It wasn't a stagecoach stop, but same type of deal, where they'd serve meals and things. And one-room cabin with a sheet down the middle, and they'd seat people on one side, the living quarters were on the other side. Well, behind the sheet, there was a guy with a sledgehammer would knock you in the head and kill you, and they robbed you, and then they buried you out in the garden. Heck of a way to fertilize tomatoes. But anyway, they escaped and were never caught, except for there was a guy that come to Salmon, Idaho here in 1884 that was probably Bender. But I don't know that that was ever proven. But anyway, it's a neat story. Where we left off yesterday, they had him locked up and put into the jail. So, I hate these things. Okay, so, the idea that Old Man Bender, or the idea that the old man might be John Bender in person was a natural one that an officer of Snook's caliber could not have missed. It came to him and his two special deputies shortly after the capture, more or less simultaneously. They did not mention it in Bannock. As soon as they had him securely shackled to the bar in the hole under the office, they checked up on the reward notices. Bender's physical description exactly fitted the prisoner. They already knew about his German accent and I don't know what that word is. Anyway, to cold-blooded murder. No one of the three, Snook, Price, or Richardson, ever doubted in the remaining years of their lives that this man they captured at the Point of Rocks near Dillon, Montana, was the Kansas Old Man Bender. Snook immediately notified the authorities in Kansas and asked for a murder warrant. There were many complications. The suspect was also charged with a murder in Idaho. It was an open and shut case in those days anyway. It was mixed up with the horse stealing also, the capital crime in the minds of the people, if not the eyes of the law. A term of court in Salmon was set for 2 weeks later. Snook would have had to get the old man's trial continued in the next term and secure permission to surrender him to the state of Kansas if the identification was established. All this took time, and in that long past day, mails were slow and telegraph officers were few and far between. Sheriff Dave Stahl came down the mountain trail from Leesburg for the term of court. He took over the office in the room back of the store while Snook, with a saddle horse, rode around the country distributing jury summonses. Stahl brought the prisoners meals at a nearby Chinese restaurant and carried them to him. He would visit the old man while he ate and then return to empty the dishes. The prisoner remarked while eating for his breakfast, "I didn't kill that man. I never saw him in my life. You can't convict me." Stahl replied, "We aren't even going to try. We know you are Old Man Bender, and we're going to take you back to Kansas." For the rest of the day, the prisoner refused to talk. Snook returned during the night with a jury veneer he had served. The next morning he took the prisoner's breakfast to him. He could have saved himself the trouble. Bender was dead. He had found a knife some former prisoner had fashioned out of a heavy barrel hoop and buried against the day of need. He had honed it on the center bar, and with it amputated enough of his foot to get out of the shackle. He bled to death doing it. So, I mean, why would you cut off your foot if you weren't guilty? It probably was him. There was no dry ice in those days and no refrigeration. There was enough whiskey in town to have saved the body, but no one appears to have thought of pickling a corpse in a substance so much in demand by the living. Snook decided to try to petrify it. He placed it in a box, dug a hole in a marshy spot where the water was known to have a calcifying effect, and weighted the box down with the rocks in the water-filled hole. I was told that that was where Safeway is now. I guess there was a swamp there at one time. He hired a local resident who answered to the name of Billy Bryant to guard the treasure, which if he could be proven genuine, it was still worth an important money in the bounty. A week later, a well-liked young man was killed by a wild horse, and he was breaking to the saddle. Everyone turned out to the funeral. Snook was one of the pallbearers. After the services, the masculine end of the crowd drifted into a half-dozen saloons along Main Street. An argument was started about two racehorses in town, one of which was owned by Snook. A race was talked up. Snook bet the lot, now occupied by the Steel Memorial Hospital, against $100 that the horse would finish the line first. The race was run on Main Street. Snook hired a jockey, and he lost the race. Snook believed the jockey was paid $50 to throw the race. All this uproar and excitement was too much for the guard, Billy Bryant, to withstand. He left the post of duty and came to town. During his absence, two brothers resurrected the remains and took them to the 17-mile ranch, which they owned. And some friends own that place now. 17-mile ranch is actually owned by a friend of ours now. None of the original buildings are here that I know of. But who knows, some of Bender's bones might be. One of the brothers had a medical education and believed Bender could be identified from his skeleton, and the skeletons were right up his alley. The body was placed in a large vat used to heat water for scalding hogs and covered with Lemhi River water. A huge fire was built under the vat, the idea being to cook the flesh from the bones. Only the fire was built, and then the stench was overpowering. The guy had been in the swamp for a week. I mean, oh man. Ranch headquarters was a 2-room log building with a dirt roof. The brothers moved the half-cooked body up onto the dirt roof of the house where they could guard it, and where they had hoped the magpies would pick the flesh from the bones. The magpies overdid the job. They absconded with the neck vertebrae and ruined everything. The skull rolled off the roof eventually and was found in the weeds several years later by High Hall, Cy Wyatt, and Matt Davis, who had camped near the old cabin with a freighting outfit. They mounted it on the center pole of the lead wagon and brought it back to Salmon. The caravan stopped in front of Hewitt's blacksmith shop, and the three freighters traded the skull to Snook for a round of drinks. He had turned in his star by now and was getting the cattle ranch started and freighted up when he could spare time for a trip. The Bender skull made many a round trip to him to Red Rock, Montana, and back to Salmon, mounted to the lead wagon. Eventually, Snook's expanding ranch and stock interests forced him off the road. His teams and empty wagons were lined up in front of the McNut Building after his last trip. Jack Black, who operated the Buckhorn Saloon, came across the street and said, "John, I'll give you a quart of whiskey for that old skull." Snook replied, "I haven't got much use for either one, but if you want old man Bender, take him." The skull rested in the central place of honor in Black's macabre collection of curios for some time. After Black's death, Johnny Britt took over the place until Prohibition came in and closed it down. The Buckhorn Saloon still had the Bender skull upon repeal of the Prohibition law. There were several changes in management, and eventually the building was changed into a cold storage plant for a nearby restaurant. Somewhere along the trail of the years, the old skull disappeared. So ends the story of the end of Old Man Bender. I was told Buckhorn Saloon burned down eventually, but I don't know. I haven't heard that for sure. And then there's another part in here that's about Kate. Let's see here. I just hope that guy really was Old Man Bender, because he got treated pretty poorly if it wasn't. Anyway, let me find this here. Okay, here it is. It says here, the following letter from Mrs. C.F. Baston of Moorhead, Kansas, presents an interesting sidelight on the mysterious Bender family. Mrs. Baston refers to an earlier article on the Benders published in the spring of 1954, titled The Cabin of Death. Didn't know about that one. I'm going to have to find that now, too. Okay, it says, Dear Sirs, I was greatly interested in your article about the Bender murder farm, and the Benders were our next-door neighbors. We still lived across the road from where the house stood. The buildings are all gone now, but there is still a line of weeds every year across the meadow showing where the ground is hardest from formerly being a road. The exact site of the house is now a wheat field. The Benders watered their cattle and stolen horses at our creek every day, and we considered them queer only due to the fact that Kate was a fortune teller. Some 20 years after the Bender scandal broke, a man came to our place with several photos of his wife, which he also took around to all the other neighbors. He wanted to know if his wife was Kate Bender. We couldn't identify the photos for sure after 20 years, so nothing more was heard of the matter. His story was that he was a deputy sheriff from somewhere in West Texas and had become interested in a rumor that the Benders had reached West Texas in their escape. One night after he had come home with some evidence, his wife struck a stick shooter in his face and made him promise to stop investigating the Bender case. He put two and two together, remembering the evidence he had uncovered and things his wife had said about Kansas during the years, her general appearance, and the fact that she was a fortune teller. From the whole, he came to the startling conclusion that his wife was the former Kate Bender. Next day, he quit his job, grabbed his duds and photos of his wife, and hopped a train to Kansas. This is all we ever knew about the matter as he told it, and we did not hear any more about it. Pretty interesting stuff. This morning, my friend Bruce sent me a text that says a little bit about John Snook. The fellow that puts on the horse sale here is Fred Snook, and it would have been his granddad, it says here. He owns the McNut Building, and it's right across from where the jail was. But Bruce, his family was one of the very first here in Salmon. Actually, they were the ones that found the gold in Leesburg, got the whole thing rolling. So, it says here that John Walls Snook was Fred's great-grandfather, and John Wilson Snook was his grandfather. The grandfather was a U.S. Marshal in Alaska during the Klondike Gold Rush, and later the warden of an Idaho state pen, and later the warden of a federal prison in Atlanta, Georgia. He was also one hell of a cowboy. Kind of neat. So it would have been his great-granddad that caught this guy that pretty sure bet was probably Bender. This building here is where the smokehouse used to be, and before that, the jail that they put Old Man Bender into, if it was Old Man Bender, and where he ended up cutting his foot off at. Straight across the road from where the jail used to be is the McNut Building. Fred Snook owns that now, the great grandson of John Snook, the guy that went and caught him. At one time, this building here, it was the courthouse before they built the regular courthouse up on the hill above us. Boy, it's busy tonight. People getting done with work, I guess. The later jail was around the corner, and Fred ended up turning that into some kind of bed and breakfast type hotel rooms. I'll show you that here next. Upstairs in the McNut Building here, there's a regular drinking bar up there that was built for the jury to kind of decide your fate. It's a regular big old wooden bar like we'd see in the Old West movies and things, with a mirror behind it and the whole 9 yards, and the jury'd sit up there and decide if they're going to hang you or not over some drinks. Things have sure changed, huh? This building was the jail at one time. It was long after Bender. But Fred has turned this into basically a small hotel. I think there's 2 or 3 rooms in there. But you can actually come to Salmon and spend the night in jail without being in trouble now. Anyway, that's all I got for that story, but can you imagine cooking some fella down and, well, first throwing him in a swamp and then cooking him down in a hog boiling vat and throwing him on the roof for the birds and then parading him back and forth on a wagon back to Red Rock and back. Red Rock, I don't know how far that is from Salmon. I'm probably guessing 60 miles, maybe a little more. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. It was kind of a fun one. I'm going to have to find that other magazine now and see what the Cabin of Death has to say. But thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.